everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today I am going to talk about what you do when you fail. Specifically, when your first published book underperforms, doesn't meet expectations, you're considered a failure at your publisher, and you're hitting roadblocks in your career. And really, I mean your first contracted book deal, which can be for more than one book. It could be for 2 or for 3, but generally if you find yourself in a position where you've underperformed and things become a lot harder in terms of moving forward in your career, that is what I want to talk about, because we don't really talk about this. Certainly not publicly, but even privately I've found that people are really not good about talking about it. I think it's because everyone, of course, hopes that it doesn't happen to them. I mean, you should hope that it doesn't happen to you, but it's also an unfortunate reality increasingly now in the YA space in particular. As always, my area of expertise is traditional publishing and YA. The market is more saturated than ever. We're publishing tons of books, but sales are down across the board, and we're starting to see emergent patterns where the bar for success is a lot higher than it was in previous years, in the sense that publishers are far less willing to give new authors a chance to kind of overcome a disappointing debut and try again with new books. We've definitely seen previous debut classes from 2012, 2013, 14, even 15 say, hey, 70 to 80% of us are still publishing, and I'm saying it right now, you heard it here, we're not going to see those same numbers 4, 5, 6 years on from 2017, 2018, 2019, etc. debuts because of this market saturation, because of this higher bar for success. Essentially, more people are washing out after a single book contract. I know that's really scary to say, but I say it so that you can prepare yourself emotionally. Is it harder than ever to debut? Yes. I've already observed certain patterns in my own debut year and in debut years before, where I have a lot of friends, and I wanted to talk about kind of some of the feelings, but really kind of your options going forward. Now, generally speaking, okay, if this happens to you, you should be talking to your agent. That should be your first port of call. You should have a very serious strategy conversation with them. But I have to concede, sometimes that is the hardest part, and sometimes your agent doesn't have the tools that you need or isn't able to support you in the way that you need. There are definitely cases where you sell your first book contract with a great high-flying agent, and when you underperform, they have less time for you. They aren't necessarily sure what to do with you if most of their other clients have had great commercial success in the past, which was easier to have in the past. And so sometimes what can end up happening, and I'm going to talk about, is sometimes you have to leave your agent and do a career reboot. But it's not always that dire. So I am speaking as an author, hello, who debuted in 2018. I did okay, but not gangbusters. It's possible you've never heard of me, but I mean, the thing is selection bias. If you're already on YouTube, you might know who I am in the context of YouTube, but as an author, I am not a breakout success YA author with name brand recognition. I sold well, but nothing extraordinary. And my second book is just coming out. We don't know what's going on with that. But I did also publish in a subgenre of YA that basically the shine wore off. I have a whole video on science fiction and YA, and specifically my debut and my second book are space YA books, which had kind of a moment in 2018, and the moment's kind of passed. And I went into writing a third book and sitting in this kind of situation where my debut was okay, but not amazing, thinking long-term strategy, and I had to think, well, what am I going to do? So a lot of these questions I had myself, and you think through all of these different solutions. So some of the advice I'm going to give is based on literally what I did, but also what I've seen friends do and or advice that I have given to friends in similar positions. You are not alone if you're watching watching this and you have had a book come out and you feel invisible. It's been a few months, it's been a year, it's been a few years, and you're just treading water and you're not sure what to do. You are not alone by any stretch. Welcome, come, gather round, let's talk. So I mentioned that you should be talking to your agent. I still feel that this is the thing, because here's a thing that's going to come up no matter what. Submitting an option to your publisher. Now, sometimes this might have happened before your book comes out, but in plenty of cases, you are submitting this option when your book has come out, and if you're staring down the barrel at just okay sales, you have to be particularly smart and strategic about your option. Every new book is a new opportunity in publishing, so go into your option very positive in this sense, but you should be talking to your agent strategically, bearing in mind how that first and second or whatever books have done, and come up with a plan. What is the strongest possible option that you can submit to your publisher in the hopes of getting another contract? In some cases, this can mean you're not submitting on proposal, as is standard. You could write the whole book. You know what's stronger than a proposal? When you have weak sales, an entire book that just screams at the publisher, this is a good, complete, final book that you don't have to do a ton of work on and we can get published. It could mean really cherry picking the proposal that you do submit and possibly stretching outside of your comfort zone. Maybe you have to do something a lot more sharply commercial. You have to really hone in on the sales focus. The thing is, many authors have to earn the right to write the niche heart books that we want to write by selling a ton of books. So sometimes it's making that pragmatic choice, which we're going to talk about, because even outside the option, this is something to consider. And to that end, the first thing that you can do if you're in this position is hone in on your brand. Really think about what aspects of the books that you already have out were the buzziest. What were people really kind of attaching onto? Hone in on those things. You should be thinking of your next project, your subsequent projects as, all right, that is clearly what I'm good at. That is what does get people excited. I should be doing more of that. Essentially what you're doing is really leaning into what you've already done, because just because you didn't break out the first or even the second time doesn't mean second or third time isn't the charm. You have it. It just needs another shot. On the other hand, the other thing that you can do is totally change your brand. If what your brand had kind of previously been, if none of it failed to take off, if it was something that you tried on one book for fun, but you have other things that you could possibly pivot to, it could be totally changing your brand for a new book. I will say that changing your brand is far easier said than done. Usually this is going to work when you do a massive, massive pivot, a completely new genre. It could even be a new category. You could be moving from YA to adult, for example. Though that also does work with honing in on your brand. You can hone in on your brand but move categories, age groups. That's always an option, a very viable good one that I have seen people do. But with changing your brand, it means either like really writing a completely different book two from a book one, assuming that book one was a standalone, or switching genres entirely. And if that book two is on contract with a publisher, because you can employ these strategies and pivot after book one has come out, but before book two in some cases, if that was a 2-book contract, you still have to work with your editor and your publisher to kind of get that pushed through. Sometimes your publisher doesn't want you to do a massive brand pivot on a single book deal. They want to hone in on your brand instead. But if you're between contracts and you're not beholden to your publisher, this is when you strategize with your agent to do that kind of hard pivot. So the next thing that you can think about, all of this really ties together, is to really take some time to do some soul searching. It is really potentially devastating. It can kill your creativity when you are in a situation where you're not as successful as you'd hope to be. Maybe you're facing pressure from your publisher or even facing pressure from your agent. Your agent should be your ally in this situation and the number one person who can help you, but sometimes they're the person who's making you feel like crap. Again, we're gonna get to that, but you need to take some time off, maybe even reread your own books or read positive reviews of your books, really to hone in, focus on your strengths as a writer. Both the things you are really good at, but also the things that you love to write. It's not about what everyone else wants you to write, your editor, your agent, your publisher, because people are going to be throwing ideas at you about how they think you should move forward in your career. But ultimately, it really is down to you. When you're in this really crappy place where you're feeling like a failure, I think personally the worst thing you could do for your creativity, for your writerly soul, is to push something that isn't organic to you. I think coming back to writing as something fun that you enjoy, doing something that comes naturally to you, I think that is how you pull yourself out of a failure funk. So for example, maybe everyone really loved the romance in your last book and you had a lot of fun writing that part. Could this mean going in a romance-heavy direction? Maybe you really love tech and world building. Is it coming up with a next project that plays to that strength? It could be, as I mentioned, a category shift. Are you frustrated by the limitations of the category that you are in? You could move. If it's YA, you start writing adult or middle grade. Maybe you're in middle grade and you want to jump all the way to adult. Don't be afraid to make big leaps if it's going to take you in the direction that plays to your natural strengths as a writer. But now I want to talk about commercial appeal and give you some advice in this area, some honestly tough talk. So when you haven't broken out on a book, when you haven't been essentially a commercial success and you are facing pushback for that, there are cases where authors weren't huge breakout successes, but they do have publishers who are supporting them as a slower burn, as kind of a niche book, etc. But when you are not in that situation and you're up against potential career death, the honest truth is at the end of the day, publishing wants to sell books. And so sometimes, often, always, the answer is what can sell? Now, I never advocate writing something that you hate. Perhaps it's just not meant to be. And if you are not happy being a commercial writer, you might have to just accept some of the realities of how much harder the business is going to be and how you're going to have to adjust your strategies accordingly. But I do encourage everyone to really think about commercial appeal. You should be reading in your category current books, the books that have broken out. You should be reading them so that you understand what publishers have been pushing, what readers want, and also just frankly, I think you should be reading for pleasure. That's another really good way to kick you out of your funk, by the way, and kind of get back into the love of writing. But honestly, when you have a poor sales record behind you, there is no shame in basically being aggressively commercial on your next project, because it is legitimately your best bet to break back into the industry and get a second shot. You have to think high concept. If you can't come up with a really catchy elevator pitch for whatever your next book is, I say you have a problem. I know that is a very aggressive stance to take, but I think that when you're staring down the barrel of they really don't sell well, you are facing an uphill climb with any editor, with any publisher, and you need to do everything in your power to make sure that they don't have a reason to say no. But okay, I've given you kind of the practical advice that I used. This first section was basically what Alexa did when she was staring down the barrel of what is the next step in her career. But what works for me simply does not work for everyone else. I was already a commercially minded writer who had a pretty flexible brand. I never considered my brand specifically sci-fi or specifically retellings. I've always considered my brand and my strengths to be my characters and kind of the soapiness of my stories. Also, all my books do have murder. It's just the main plot for the first time in my thriller. But I have had plenty of friends who just can't do that kind of pivot. It doesn't come naturally to them. It makes them miserable. So what do you do if none of that is an option for you? But regardless, you are staring down the barrel of what is next for my career. You don't want to give up on writing. So my next tip, honestly, is to take a break, and not a short break. All of the other stuff I've mentioned involves some short break time. refilling the well, etc. But sometimes you get into such a funk from your first or your second book, things not going the way you want, especially when you are in that situation where your editor doesn't seem to support you, where even your agent maybe isn't supporting you. Allow yourself to take time off, and it could be several years. And I know you're going like, oh my God, especially if you're not already in this situation. That seems unfathomable. But honestly, you'd be amazed what a few years of recharge time can do. We have definitely seen cases where someone had a okay debut, and then they just kind of quietly went away for a little while, and they published another book 3, maybe 4, even 5 years later, and then just continued on in their career. The amazing thing is that publishing, but in particular YA, but I think other areas as well, has a remarkably short memory. And while your previous sales are always going to follow you, essentially, they can matter a lot less when a ton of time has passed and essentially you're looking at a new consumer market. Again, particularly YA. A market, an audience of actual teens, not the adult readers, but that legitimately refreshes itself every couple of years. Teens reading books right now were not reading YA 5 years ago. So there are always new opportunities to kind of just come back in, reinvent yourself, try again. And you can only do this if you allow yourself to take the time and take the space. And you're taking the time and you're taking the space to do a lot of self-reflection, to focus on other things. I know people who have used this time to focus on their families, try a different career, just kind of re-establish their social norms and rediscover their love of writing, what they love about writing, all of that stuff I mentioned about honing in on your brand and discovering what you really love to write. Sometimes that takes more than a few months. It takes a couple of years, and that time is really, really necessary. You can't get blood from a stone, and when you have people shouting in your ear in all directions of what they think you should be writing, sometimes instead you completely shut down. So a lot of time off is a good idea. Okay, now back to the proactive solutions. So another thing that you can do when you're in this situation, this is the time when you say screw it, and you write the crazy, fun, or challenging, or weird book that you have wanted to write. Again, it's all about finding joy in the writing again, but you say F it, and you write that damn book. Whatever it takes to get you excited again, but also you never know what's going to happen with that crazy book that you decide to write. It could be the one. If it's not the one, it recharged you so that you can write the next one. It's all about restarting your batteries and writing something that is fun, that isn't necessarily all about sell, 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 sell. The thing about when you fail, I really do hate using that word, but you are going to feel like a failure. So it sucks because the weird thing about commercial publishing books, is that you get into this weird space of, I love writing. I wrote this because I wanted to write it. There are readers who love this book. You're always going to find readers. But you start to intrinsically tie your self-worth as a writer to sales. To this arbitrary measure of success, to being the darling of your publisher. And this can really beat down your soul. So part of restarting your battery pack, maybe after you've had that recharge period, is just writing because you love it again. Writing for you rather than writing for other people. Because in the beginning, that's what we all were doing. But then we have to kind of have this shift when we get into commercial publishing, trade publishing, and sometimes you just have to fight to get that spark back. Hello, editing Alexa here. I'm just popping in because I realized I left out something really, really important in the original video, and that is yet another option for authors when you are looking for the next thing to do when your books haven't performed particularly well, and that is to do IP, intellectual property. I have an entire video on how IP works in publishing and what it is, and there are a few different types. The most obvious types are things like doing a Disney tie-in book or doing a Star Wars Wars book, but there's also IP where the publisher comes up with a concept and hires a writer to write it. Additionally, you can work with a book packager, which is an independent company like Alloy or Glasstown or Cake, who comes up with ideas and outlines, again, hires writers to write books, and then they submit the books for those writers. So if you are thinking that any of these opportunities might work for you in a mid-career slump, this is how you continue to write and be paid to write and have books come out, you should talk to your agent. Agents will have these contacts. Good agents will have these contacts with the editors and the publishers. They'll know who is working on what, and they will be able to submit your name for consideration, and then you might get the opportunity to audition. Another option that is easier said than done, but I did want to throw it out there, is ghostwriting. This is another thing that authors will do when they hit kind of a roadblock in their career. Again, a way to continue to write, to continue to get paid to write, and to continue to publish. But of course, when you ghostwrite, your name doesn't go on the book. But I have heard of people who have been able to continue to make a living by doing this in the romance space or celebrity memoir space. Ghostwriting is a whole other kettle of fish, and your average agent isn't going to necessarily know how you can get into it, but there are ways to kind of get your foot in the door for ghostwriting. The point that I want to make is that this is another avenue for when your career isn't going the way you want it to, but you need to continue to write books and be paid to write books. You can essentially write books on spec for other people, whether it's IP, a packaged book, or ghostwriting. I just didn't want to leave that out. I realized if I had, it would kind of make this video, which I hope to be relatively definitive, have a huge hole in it. So back to Past Alexa. Okay, so here is the big one. This is the nuclear option, or sliding scale of nuclear options. So I mentioned sometimes you can get into this funk of kind of feeling like a failure. Sometimes your publisher's just done with you. They're like, you didn't really break out. We're not interested in publishing your books anymore. So then it's you strategize with your agent and it's like, okay, we're gonna find a new publisher. And that is the step forward, the necessary step forward. Sometimes it's your agent who is not providing you with adequate support. Again, I don't say this to scare anyone, but it is a reality that sometimes with hyper-commercially minded agents, if you don't break out on book deal number 1, they have less time for you, less interest in you. Not all agents are like this. There are amazing agents who will stick with their clients through thick and thin and help you troubleshoot through these solutions. But I don't want to gaslight anyone who is in a situation where they realize upon not being a runaway hit success or being a perfect author that their agent just isn't providing them with the support they need. So next option is you leave your agent. It is really, really scary. You have to have new material to do it as well. So this all has to go hand in hand with finding your spark again, writing something totally new, whether within your brand or in a new space. And then you have to break up with your agent and go back out and query again. So just a little side note about that. It is definitely a mixed bag when it comes to querying as someone who has already published a book. It really runs the gamut. If you were published by a pretty major publisher, that can work in your favor. If you were published by a publisher, that can work against you. But at the same time, another harsh reality is that your sales history can also follow you into the query trenches. Any agent that you query can look at the sales of your previous book. And often if what you're querying isn't sharply commercial or the agent can't see a strategy for pivoting off of your previous sales, it can impact their interest in your project. It can also go swimmingly well. I know plenty of people who left their agents after their first or second book and got agents really, really quickly, and they helped them through their not quite mid-career slump. There are just as many runaway success stories as there are stories that had more challenges. I say that so that you are not scared to leave an agent who isn't working for you, but also that you don't go in with unrealistic expectations. Querying is marginally easier when you've already been published, but it is by no means any kind of guarantee or home run. But changing agents can be a game changer. It could be that new agent who like really understands your brand or where your brand could go, who has additional publisher contacts, who knows what to do for your next phase career, who understands the new category that you want to move in. Again, if you're moving age groups or if you're going from sci-fi to romance, whatever it is. And then something that they might suggest or you might decide to do on your own, whether you leave your agent or not, this is another option for when you haven't done so well in your early books, and that is reinvent yourself. You can change your name. This tends to be a last resort that most people don't want to do for a very good reason. Restarting from scratch is, it can feel really devastating, but depending on how that first push went, you legit can just change your name and start over. And you basically get a fresh start. Again, this is going to depend on how your debut is. So like, for example, I wouldn't be able to like change my name and start over. You guys know what I look like, and I didn't fail that badly, by the way. And I guess that's the thing. To necessitate changing your name, you really have to do poorly. People have to literally not know who you are. It is a worst case scenario when you sold only 100 copies and don't really have a social media platform. Or if many, many, many years have passed. I mentioned sometimes you need 2 or 3 years to recharge and start over. That can be an ideal time to do a total brand redo. Another thing that can happen or you can do that I just want to make writers aware of, if you've failed to break out, say, with a big 5, another option, and I know that it's like strange to think of or hard to accept, is to essentially downgrade your publisher. And I honestly hate to use that word because this is the thing. Non-big 5 publishers, so smaller majors, major smalls, kind of those well-respected small publishers, what's amazing about a lot of them is that you're on a smaller list. They can dedicate a ton more time to you. So going to a publisher like that for a second or third book, not changing your brand, etc., can be an amazing career move because we have definitely seen authors who their first couple of books were with big 5s and they did okay, but not great. But then they sold a book, often a book that was like a heart project. I've seen this happen a few times, and that publisher puts a ton of push into them. They really support that author, and then that author breaks out. So that is definitely a possibility. It's also a possibility to go in the opposite direction, which is the slow burn. You start out with a smaller publisher and you do modestly, but you're not a breakout. And then you are able to write something fresh and new and commercial and sexy and move up to a bigger publisher who then has the resources to break you out. There's so many different career paths and options. And again, you should be strategizing with your agent about this, but this is to let you know you can have a kind of okay debut, an okay second book, third book, and there's always something you can do strategically to push forward and try again. But I do have to warn writers, you have to want it really, really bad. It is an uphill battle when you're no longer a sexy, brand new, buzzy debut. We have a debut culture in publishing, and it is very difficult to kind of make those. This is what's so sad because of the way the industry has changed. I joke that it's not quite a mid-career push. The sad thing is that getting to your second contract now is one of the hardest things that you will ever do. There are still mid-career slumps that can happen. That's later strategy to worry about. But I have seen patterns of more recent debuts in my class, friends of mine before and after me, where the next contract is simply not guaranteed. So you have to essentially figure out a mid-career strategy at the beginning of your career. And that's what all of this is. So the next thing that could be an option for you, this is kind of moving away from traditional publishing, and that is self-publish, to be honest. Go hybrid. If you had a traditional publishing experience and it just hasn't worked for you, particularly if you find that the things that you write, that you love to write, traditional publishing just doesn't know how to support those things, doesn't know how to break them out, but you know, because you're a smart and savvy consumer/reader and you're good at research, you know that what you love to write does really well in self-publishing, then why not consider self-publishing? I've also seen many writers do this. A great example of this is I've seen writers see that their YA career has kind of petered out, and so they move into adult romance, which thrives in self-publishing, and they have really lucrative kind of second wind careers. That's an example of where I've seen people overcome mid-career slumps, but again, repeating, nowadays, the mid-career slump comes much, much earlier for some of us. But that is definitely a super valid option. And once you start self-publishing, doesn't mean you couldn't traditionally publish more things in the future. You just start to do a hybrid model to your career. But as always, have this conversation with your agent because you will want to work out things like, are they taking a cut of your self-published profits? Will they still handle your sub rights, etc.? But self-publishing, I think, is a super valid option for someone who has started out traditional publishing and is trying to figure out next steps, but doesn't necessarily feel that traditional publishing is the right space for those next steps. And lastly, before I generally speak about feelings, I am going to offer, it's the answer that you probably don't want to hear, but it's realistic, so I'm going to offer it. And that is, it is totally okay if you go through all of this. And this is no matter what stage in your career you're in. By the way, I made this with people kind of at my stage in mind where you got your first book deal, but it's harder to get a second book deal nowadays. But this works for you if you're mid-career or even later in your career. It's okay if you don't want to do this grind anymore, because it is a grind. I have seen it really wear down people in their soul and make them hate writing and hate stories and just be drained of everything. And I mentioned taking many, many years off. That is still my best advice when all the other solutions just aren't going to work for you. You literally cannot do any of it. And the hope, of course, is that you're going to come out of that several year period refreshed and you try again or you try different. That's another great time to go, well, maybe I want to try self-publishing this time. But I also want to acknowledge that for some people, they publish a book, maybe two, they do the traditional publishing grind and determine that it's not for them. It is not for everyone. And if you are feeling that way, don't feel bad. I want that, honestly, about all of this. I want to reassure all of you watching this, if you're going through these feelings and if you're not there yet, you'll be prepared when you get there. And that is, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be let down by your publishing experience. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to have this dream come true and realize that it's not what you wanted, that it's not what you expected, that it's not enough. And you are going to feel so ungrateful for feeling that way. We all feel that way at different moments. There's always another goalpost to reach. And I hope that you continue to strive for those goalposts, continue to push yourself forward, that I've given you some ideas on how you can pivot and strategize and realize that your career is not over just because you hit one roadblock. But I also give you permission, not that you need my permission, but to decide that you just don't want to do it anymore. It's completely okay. You were still successful. You still did it. You published a book. That is crazy. There are people who will never even finish a draft of a book. You did something great. And that's what I want to leave you with. I want to remind you of all the good feelings, all the good moments that no one can take away from you. Publisher disappointment, lackluster sales, any of that. No one can take your accomplishments away from you. The good parts. You wrote a book, you sold it, and it was published. You have a real book that people read. That is enough if that's all you want. That is enough to use as fuel to keep going and to do more. Every writer is going to find a different solution for themselves because we're all a mix of different kind of variables, personality traits, ideas, and so on. But just know that if you feel like publishing's maybe chewed you up a bit and spat you out, pushed you to the side, that you can be okay no matter what decision you make, no matter what your next steps are. A reminder again that every new book is a new opportunity, And the metric of success isn't necessarily a ton of sales, being famous, even being traditionally published. Success is whatever you want it to be when it comes to writing and publishing. And who cares if you didn't meet expectations, if you were disappointing? Are you happy with the book that you wrote? Are you happy to see people reading it? Are you satisfied? That is honestly all that matters. At the end of the day, this career is really hard. Writing books is hard. Publishing books is hard. And it is normal to have ups and downs in your writing journey. All of your feelings are valid, but I hope that I have offered some thoughts and some hope for what you can do for next steps. Really, if I didn't say it enough times already, my advice is to return to the part of writing that you love and don't be afraid to pivot. Sometimes what you have to do is kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and just start fresh. So much of publishing is kind of luck and timing, and what you just have to do is try again, and maybe next time luck and timing will work in your favor. It's never over until it's over, and really you do have the final say in whether it is over, because it's only really over when you give up writing. Sorry, this one was a bit heavy and a bit of a downer. As positive as I tried to be, it's really difficult to talk about the topic of failure in publishing because it is kind of an unmentionable, but the reality is sales are down and a lot of people are facing publisher disappointment. I'm seeing it be more common for options not to be picked up, etc. And so you just have to be a bit more creative when it comes to overcoming these publishing obstacles. Let me know down below in the comments if you have any thoughts or questions about this. It's tough too because it's very individualized and I don't expect any of you to spew your personal business down below, but just let you know that you are not alone, that many authors share these experiences and these feelings. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and I will make more in-depth, slightly depressing videos about the realities of writing and traditional publishing. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.